It's a strange feeling when you hear police sirens approaching and have the sinking realization that they're coming for you, not because you've done anything wrong, but because someone else is so profoundly entitled they've decided to weaponize the emergency services over your swimming pool. That was the moment my quiet, suburban life turned into a strategic battleground. The HOA president's daughter, a 16-year-old girl with her mother's disposition and a warped sense of ownership, had called 911 because I had the audacity to lock the gate to my own private pool. This wasn't a community pool. It was the centerpiece of the backyard that I had paid for, that I cleaned, and that I was legally liable for. And I was about to teach the new self-appointed queen of our neighborhood, Brenda, and her little princess, Kylie, a very public lesson in property lines, legal statutes, and the beautiful, beautiful consequences of their own actions. My name is Alex. I'm a land surveyor by trade, which, I admit, isn't the most exciting profession in the world. It's a job of precision, patience, and an almost religious devotion to the sanctity of legal boundaries. I spend my days dealing with deeds, easements, and topographical maps, translating the complex language of legal documents into physical points on the earth. I love the quiet certainty of it. A property line is not a suggestion, it's a fact. My home was my sanctuary for exactly that reason. It was a corner lot in a pleasant, if somewhat cookie-cutter, subdivision. My house was the only one with an in-ground pool, a feature installed by the previous owner and the primary reason I'd bought the place. I craved the solitude, the ability to come home from a long day, float in the cool water, and let the world's ambiguities drift away. All I wanted was to be left alone. The trouble started about a month after Brenda was elected HOA president. She hadn't won on a platform of community improvement, but rather on a wave of nitpicking and busybody energy that a certain type of homeowner mistakes for leadership. Brenda was a woman who seemed to believe that the HOA presidency imbued her with feudal authority. Her first official act wasn't to address the cracked pavement on the communal tennis court or the dying trees near the entrance. It was to knock on my door with her daughter Kylie in tow. Brenda was all plastic smiles and sharp, assessing eyes. Kylie stood behind her, phone in hand, looking at my pool over her mother's shoulder with a bored, yet possessive, expression. "Alex, hi," Brenda began, her voice dripping with faux friendliness. "We're just so thrilled to be leading the community forward. And one of the things I want to foster is a real sense of sharing. I already knew where this was going. Kylie and her friends are just dying with this heat wave. And we were thinking, since you have that lovely pool, it would be a wonderful gesture of community spirit to let the neighborhood kids use it." I offered a polite, but firm, refusal. I explained the immense liability, the insurance nightmare it would create, and my personal preference for privacy. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 2 days later, I came home from work to the sounds of splashing and shrieking. Brenda, Kylie, and a half-dozen of her friends were having a full-blown party in my backyard. They'd simply unlatched the simple gate. I was furious, but I kept my composure. I walked out, ordered everyone off my property, and was met with Brenda's indignant sputtering about my lack of spirit. But what she didn't know, as she dragged her protesting daughter away, was that my desire for peace was about to be supplanted by my professional's obsession with order. She had trespassed not just on my land, but on my entire worldview. And I was about to use my very particular set of skills to draw a line she couldn't cross. Have you ever had someone in a position of minor authority act like they're the supreme ruler of the world? It's infuriating, isn't it? Well, I promise you, the story of how I dismantled Brenda's little kingdom, using nothing but public records and her own arrogance, is going to be incredibly satisfying. After the uninvited pool party, I knew a polite conversation was no longer a viable option. Brenda had demonstrated a complete disregard for a verbal boundary, so I had to establish a more formal one. My first step was to operate within the system she supposedly represented. I drafted a carefully worded email to her official HOA president email address. I kept the tone professional and dispassionate. I cited the specific state statutes regarding trespassing, premises liability, and the legal definition of private property. I attached a copy of my property deed, with the lot boundaries clearly marked. I explained, in no uncertain terms, that any further uninvited presence on my property by her, her family, or her guests would be reported to the police as criminal trespassing. I concluded the email by stating my hope that this would resolve the matter amicably. I was giving her a chance to retreat gracefully, to chalk it up to a misunderstanding. It was a mistake to assume she was capable of such reason. Her reply came within the hour. It was a masterpiece of condescension and passive-aggressive nonsense. She didn't address a single legal point I had made. Instead, she wrote, "Alex, I received your very formal email. I think you're misunderstanding the spirit of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC and RS, you agreed to when you bought your home. This is a community, and Article 4, Section 2, about community standards is meant to prevent antisocial behavior, like hoarding resources. While the pool is on your lot, your unwillingness to share is creating a negative atmosphere. I'm disappointed you feel the need to be so hostile. It was infuriating." She was twisting a vague clause about keeping our lawns tidy into a justification for using my pool. She was gaslighting me, painting my desire for basic privacy as being antisocial and hostile. The gauntlet had been thrown. She wasn't just an entitled neighbor. She was an antagonist who believed her title gave her the power to rewrite reality and the law itself. That weekend, the situation escalated beyond my worst expectations. I had to run errands on Saturday morning. Before I left, I installed a heavy-duty padlock on the pool gate. It felt absurd, having to fortify my own backyard in a quiet suburb, but Brenda had left me no choice. When I returned 3 hours later, it was to a scene of pure chaos. It wasn't just Kylie and her friends this time. Brenda had invited at least 4 other families over. They had set up lawn chairs on my patio. They had a cooler full of drinks on my grass. They had brought their own pool floats, which were piled up against the now-locked gate like a colorful, pathetic siege engine. They were having a full-blown cookout on a grill they had wheeled onto the edge of my driveway. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. I parked my car and walked towards the crowd. As soon as Brenda saw me, she marched over, her face a mask of indignation. "There you are," she snapped, as if I were the one who was late for an appointment. "We've been waiting. Could you please unlock the gate? The children are getting overheated." I just stared at her, dumbfounded. "Brenda, this is my property. You are all trespassing. I told you this in my email. You need to leave." Now, the other adults looked suddenly uncomfortable, realizing they'd been led into a confrontation by this woman. They started gathering their things, whispering apologies. But Brenda was immovable. "Don't be ridiculous," she sneered. "We're not leaving. We live here. You are creating a hostile environment in violation of the bylaws, that was it." My patience was gone. "If you are not all off my property in 5 minutes," I said, my voice low and cold, "I will be calling the police." That threat, finally, seemed to penetrate her thick skull. She began screeching at the other families for being cowards, but the party was over. As they packed up their grill and herded their children away, Brenda gave me a look of pure venom. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "I'm the president of this HOA. I will make you regret this." It was an open declaration of war. And as I watched her stomp away, I knew my simple life was over. But I also felt a new sense of resolve. She wanted a war over boundaries? Fine. I was a surveyor. Boundaries were my entire world. The following Tuesday was the day everything changed. It was the day the conflict went from a neighborhood squabble to a matter of official record. And it was the day Brenda handed me the perfect weapon to use against her. I was working from my home office, enjoying the peace and quiet I had fought so hard to reclaim. Around 2 p.m., my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole and my stomach dropped. 2 uniformed police officers were standing on my porch. My first thought was that Brenda had followed through on her threat and fabricated some complaint against me. I took a deep breath, opened the door, and tried to look as non-threatening as possible. "Good afternoon, officers. How can I help you?" The older of the 2 officers had a tired, patient look on his face. "Sir, we received a 911 call from this address. The caller, a young lady, stated that she was being illegally locked out of a public facility and that the person responsible was refusing her access." I blinked. It took me a second to process the sheer, unmitigated gall. "You've got to be kidding me," I said, a humorless laugh escaping my lips. "Let me guess." The caller's name was Kylie. The officer's eyebrow twitched in confirmation. "Sir, is there a community pool here?" I shook my head. "No, officer. There is my private swimming pool in my private backyard. The young lady who called you is the daughter of my HOA president, and they've been trespassing on my property for weeks, demanding to use it. This morning, I found her trying to pry the lock off the gate. When she couldn't, she apparently decided to call 911. I invited them in and walked them through the house to the back window, pointing to the pool. That's it. As you can see, it's fully enclosed within my fenced yard, part of my property." The younger officer was already looking annoyed. "So this is a residential home, not a community clubhouse?" "Correct," I said. "I can show you my deed and property survey if you'd like." The senior officer waved his hand dismissively. "That won't be necessary, sir. It's pretty clear what's going on here." He then turned to me, his expression serious. "Sir, I'm going to go have a word with the young lady and her mother. But you should know, misuse of the 911 system is a serious offense. We have actual emergencies to deal with. This kind of thing clogs up the system and can put lives at risk." And right there, in that moment, it was like a light bulb went on in my head. A legal, documented, official event. A paper trail. Brenda's arrogance, channeled through her daughter, had finally crossed a line that wasn't drawn on a map, but in a municipal code book. The officer's words echoed in my mind. A serious offense. This was no longer just my word against hers. This was a police report. This was evidence. As the officers left, I saw them walk across the street to Brenda's house. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see Brenda's animated, indignant gesturing and the officer's firm, unimpressed stance. She was trying to spin it, to play the victim, but it was too late. They had the facts. My investigation didn't start with anger anymore. It started with a cold, calculated clarity. Brenda thought her power came from an HOA title. She was about to find out that true power comes from knowing the facts, understanding the law, and having the documentation to prove it. I went to my computer and started with a simple search. How to obtain a police report. The war wasn't about the pool anymore. It was about accountability. My professional life is built on a simple principle. The official record is king. The fancy, laminated map an HOA hands out is nice, but the real truth lies in the dusty, ink-stamped plat maps filed away in the county records office. These are the foundational documents of a community, the legal bedrock upon which everything else is built. Armed with the police report number from the 911 incident, I knew my first step was to build an unshakable fortress of documentation. But I also knew the 911 call, while a powerful piece of evidence, was just a symptom of Brenda's deeper issue, her belief that her authority was absolute and the rules didn't apply to her. I decided to test that belief by examining the very source of her power, the HOA itself. The next morning, I drove down to the County Hall of Records. It's a place I know well, a hushed, slightly musty building filled with librarians of legal documents. I wasn't looking for my own deed this time. I was looking for the master plan, the original subdivision plat for Oakwood Creek Estates, filed by the developer 15 years ago. The clerk, a helpful woman named Dolores whom I'd worked with on professional jobs, found the large, rolled-up document in the archives. I carefully unfurled it on a large table. It was a beautiful piece of drafting. Every lot, every road, every utility easement was laid out with mathematical precision. I immediately located my own lot, number 112, and confirmed what I already knew. It was a standard residential plot with no shared access or public use designations whatsoever. Then, I looked for the source of Brenda's authority, the community clubhouse. I found it on the map, situated on a small parcel of land near the neighborhood entrance. It was designated as Lot 72. And that's when I saw it. It was a detail so small, so subtle, that anyone without a surveyor's eye would have missed it completely. On the official, legally filed plat map, Lot 72 had the exact same zoning designation as my lot and every other lot in the subdivision. R1 for single-family residential. There was no C for commercial, no P for public use, no special designation for a clubhouse or community assembly building. According to the foundational legal document for Oakwood Creek Estates, the land the HOA clubhouse was built on was intended for a house, just like mine. My heart started beating a little faster. This was more than just an oversight. It was a potentially massive violation. An HOA clubhouse is a place of public assembly. It has different building codes, different insurance requirements, and crucially, different zoning laws than a private home. If the developer built a clubhouse on a lot zoned for a single-family home and the HOA had been operating it as such ever since, they were in flagrant violation of municipal zoning ordinances. I took high-resolution photos of the plat map with my phone, making sure to capture the title block, the surveyor's seal, and the county clerk's filing stamp. Then, I went to another department, zoning and planning. I pulled the file for the clubhouse's original building permit. The permit application, filed by the developer, described the structure as a community management office and recreation building, but attached to it was a copy of the wrong map. It was a simplified, marketing version of the plat, the kind given to prospective homebuyers. And on that version, Lot 72 was conveniently labeled Community Center. Someone, either the developer or an early HOA board, had used a non-binding, promotional document to get the building permit, while the legally binding plat map in the Hall of Records told a completely different story. It was a classic bait and switch. The implications were staggering. For over a decade, every HOA meeting held in that building had been in a technically illegal structure. The insurance policy the HOA paid for with our dues was likely null and void, as it would have been issued based on the premise that the building was legally compliant. Every dollar spent on the clubhouse's upkeep, on the utilities, on Brenda's stupid improvement projects, was money spent on a non-compliant asset. This was the aha moment, bigger and more devastating than I could have ever imagined. Brenda's petty tyranny over my pool was a symptom of a much larger institutional rot. She was the captain of a ship that had been built on a faulty foundation, and she was so busy policing the passengers that she had no idea the whole vessel was about to be declared unseaworthy. I had found her vulnerability. It wasn't just her ego, it was the very building she ruled from. Walking out of the County Hall of Records, I felt a surge of adrenaline and a cold, clear sense of purpose. This was no longer about a neighborhood dispute, it was about systemic illegality. Brenda's personal crusade against me had inadvertently shone a light on a decade-old secret that could bring the entire HOA leadership crashing down. My strategy, which had been vaguely forming, now snapped into sharp focus. It would be a multi-pronged assault, executed with the precision of a survey and culminating in a moment of public reckoning. I broke the plan down into 4 distinct phases, each designed to dismantle a piece of Brenda's perceived authority. Phase 1 was fortification and documentation. This was already in progress. The new lock on the pool gate was the physical barrier. The next step was to add a technological one. That evening, I purchased and installed a set of high-resolution, motion-activated security cameras covering my entire backyard, with a specific focus on the pool gate. The goal was twofold: to deter any further attempts at trespassing, and to create an irrefutable video record if they were foolish enough to try. Every time Kylie rattled the gate or Brenda glared at my house from her lawn, it would be captured in crystal-clear 4K video, time-stamped and saved to a secure cloud server. This would be my defense, my evidence of their continued harassment. Phase 2 was official channels. Brenda and Kylie had misused the 911 system. I would use the system correctly. I drafted a formal letter to the chief of police, with a carbon copy sent via certified mail to the city manager's office. In the letter, I detailed the history of the harassment, the trespassing incidents, and culminated with the frivolous 911 call. I attached a copy of the police report. I wasn't asking for charges to be pressed against Kylie. That would seem vindictive. Instead, I framed it as a concerned citizen's report on the misuse of emergency resources, and I formally requested that the HOA be notified about the seriousness of such actions to prevent future occurrences. This would put Brenda on the radar of the city administration, not as an HOA president, but as the leader of an organization whose members were abusing municipal services. It was a subtle but significant shift in her official standing. Phase 3 was the keystone, the core of my entire plan. This involved the clubhouse. I spent the next week compiling a comprehensive report. I was in my element. I used my professional surveying software to create a series of exhibits. Exhibit A was a high-quality print of the official, filed plat map, with Lot 72 clearly highlighted. Exhibit B was the simplified, promotional map used for the building permit. Exhibit C was an overlay, showing the discrepancy between the two. Exhibit D was a printout of the municipal zoning code, with the sections on R1 zoning and the requirements for places of public assembly highlighted in bright yellow. Exhibit E was a summary of the potential legal and financial liabilities, voided insurance, municipal fines, and the personal liability of the board members for knowingly operating a non-compliant facility. I compiled it all into a dozen professionally bound folders. It was a time bomb of bureaucratic truth. Phase 4 was the public forum. Sending this information to Brenda directly would be a mistake. She would try to bury it, to spin it, to attack me personally. No, the reveal had to be public, in a setting where she was at her most confident and her authority was on full display. The perfect venue was, of course, the upcoming annual HOA homeowners meeting. It was scheduled in 3 weeks. It was the one time all year that the board had to face the homeowners directly to present the budget and hold elections. Brenda would be in her element, presiding over the meeting from her throne in the very building I was about to prove was illegal. I would hold my fire until then. I would let her continue her reign, oblivious. I would let her send out her smug newsletters and her petty violation notices. I would let her build her platform higher and higher, so that when I kicked it out from under her, the fall would be that much more spectacular. My plan was set. It was no longer about emotion or anger. It was about facts, processes, and the inevitable triumph of documented reality over arrogant fiction. Brenda had started a war over a few hundred square feet of water, and I was about to end it by taking away the very ground beneath her feet. In the 3 weeks leading up to the annual HOA meeting, I transitioned from investigator to silent field marshal, meticulously laying the groundwork for the final confrontation. This was the phase of quiet execution, of moving my pieces into place while my opponent remained blissfully unaware of the game even being played. My new security cameras paid dividends almost immediately. On the first Saturday after their installation, the motion sensor on my phone buzzed. I pulled up the live feed and watched, with a grim sense of satisfaction, as Kylie approached the pool gate. She was with 2 friends, and she was acting tough, telling them how this was basically the neighborhood pool and that the crazy guy who lived here was on a power trip. She produced a hairpin from her pocket and spent a full 2 minutes trying to pick the new padlock, her friends giggling behind her. The camera captured her frustrated expression in stunning detail as the lock refused to yield. The footage was automatically saved, timestamped, and backed up. This happened 3 more times over the next 2 weeks. It was a pattern of deliberate, repeated attempted trespass, and I had it all on video. I didn't say a word to them. I just let the evidence accumulate, another file folder in my growing arsenal. A week later, I received a response to my certified letter from the city manager's office. It was a formal, brief note acknowledging receipt of my complaint. It stated that the chief of police had been directed to address the issue of 911 misuse with the Oakwood Creek Estates HOA Board of Directors. A copy of this letter, it noted, had been forwarded to the HOA's official address, Brenda's address. I imagined her opening that letter, seeing the official city letterhead, reading my name, and feeling that first, tiny prick of doubt in her impenetrable wall of self-assurance. She was no longer just dealing with a disgruntled homeowner. She was now on the city's official naughty list. My next step was more subtle. I began taking evening walks around the neighborhood, something I rarely did before. I wasn't looking for a fight. I was conducting reconnaissance. I would politely greet my neighbors as I passed, engaging in small talk. I quickly discovered that I was not the only one chafing under Brenda's rule. One neighbor, an elderly gentleman named George, complained that he'd received 3 violation notices for his bird feeder, which Brenda had deemed unhygienic. Another couple, the Garcias, were in a protracted battle over the shade of beige they had painted their shutters, which Brenda claimed was 5% too dark compared to the approved swatch. They were all frustrated by her petty tyranny and the condescending tone of the HOA newsletter she wrote. I didn't reveal my hand. I didn't mention the clubhouse or the plat maps. I simply listened, nodded sympathetically, and said things like, yes, a lack of transparency and consistent application of the rules seems to be a problem, or it does feel like the board's priorities are a bit misplaced, doesn't it? I was planting seeds. I was turning their individual grievances into a shared narrative of poor leadership. I wanted them to walk into that annual meeting not as isolated complainers, but as a unified front, already primed to question Brenda's competence. The final piece of the puzzle fell into my lap just 4 days before the meeting. A certified letter arrived from the HOA. It was a formal notice of violation. Brenda, in a stunning act of retaliatory audacity, was fining me $200 for the unapproved installation of security fixtures, my cameras. She cited a vague bylaw about maintaining the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood. It was perfect. It was a clear act of retaliation, and it was unbelievably stupid. She was penalizing me for taking measures to prevent the criminal activity that her own daughter was engaging in. I carefully placed the violation notice in the folder with the video evidence. It would be the final, personal touch to my presentation, a clear demonstration of her using her power not for the community's good, but for personal vengeance. The stage was now perfectly set. My evidence was compiled, the city was aware, the neighbors were discontented, and the antagonist had just handed me a perfect example of her own corruption. All that was left was to wait for the curtain to rise. The atmosphere in the days leading up to the HOA meeting was thick with a tense, deceptive calm. On the surface, it was business as usual. The lawns were mowed, the mail was delivered, and life in Oakwood Creek Estates plodded along. But beneath that veneer, currents were shifting. The seeds of dissent I had sown on my evening walks were beginning to sprout. I saw neighbors who rarely spoke to each other now lingering by their mailboxes, their conversations low and earnest. I overheard snippets about shutter colors and bird feeders. The discontent was coalescing. Brenda, however, remained cocooned in her own self-importance. The HOA newsletter that arrived 2 days before the meeting was the pinnacle of her arrogance. It featured a large, smiling photo of herself with the headline, "Your President, moving us forward." The content was a self-congratulatory screed about her accomplishments, the new, more restrictive garbage can policy, the successful negotiation of a more expensive landscaping contract, which she painted as a win for quality. And her proudest achievement, the installation of a large, new, and garishly carved "Welcome to Oakwood Creek" sign at the neighborhood entrance. The newsletter concluded with a preview of the meeting's agenda. She was proposing a 15% increase in annual dues to fund her beautification projects and create a larger legal fund to enforce compliance. She was literally asking the homeowners to give her more money to sue them with. It was so tone-deaf, so completely oblivious to the mood of the community, that I almost felt a flicker of pity for her. She had no idea she was composing the overture to her own demise. My own preparations were methodical and calm. I reviewed my professionally bound reports one last time. I had a master copy for myself and 11 others, one for each of the other board members and a few key homeowners I'd identified as potential allies, like George and the Garcias. I rehearsed my speech, not to memorize it, but to internalize the key points, ensuring I could deliver them calmly and factually, without a trace of anger or vindictiveness in my voice. I wanted my presentation to be an undeniable statement of fact, not an emotional outburst. My demeanor needed to be that of a professional presenting a report, not a victim seeking revenge. The night before the meeting, I felt a strange sense of serenity. The frustration that had fueled me for weeks had cooled into a solid core of resolve. I had done the work. I had the truth on my side. The outcome was now less a matter of chance and more a matter of physics, a carefully constructed demolition where, once the key supports were removed, the structure was destined to fall. Brenda made one last, critical error on the day of the meeting. In an email sent to all homeowners that morning, she announced a small change to the agenda. Due to the expected high interest in her proposed budget, she was moving the homeowner open forum to the very end of the meeting, after the budget vote. It was a classic bureaucratic trick to suppress dissent. People would be tired and want to go home, and any complaints would be rendered moot since the controversial items would have already been voted on. But she had miscalculated. She thought she was silencing lone complainers. Instead, she was bottling up a growing pressure that would now have no release until it had reached its maximum explosive potential. It also gave me the perfect dramatic structure, her triumphant budget presentation, followed immediately by my systematic dismantling of her entire reality. As I gathered my folders and prepared to walk over to the clubhouse, I took one last look at the security camera feed on my phone. The view of my peaceful, empty pool area was crisp and clear. The battle for my quiet enjoyment was about to end, not with a shouted threat over a fence, but with the quiet, devastating power of a certified document in a public forum. The clubhouse was buzzing with a nervous energy. At least 50 homeowners were packed into the beige-walled meeting room, far more than the usual dozen who showed up for these things. The air was stale with the smell of cheap coffee and simmering resentment. Brenda sat at the head of a long table at the front of the room, flanked by the 4 other board members, who mostly looked bored or uncomfortable. She was radiant, dressed in a power-red blazer, beaming as if presiding over a coronation. She saw me walk in, carrying my briefcase, and gave me a smirk of pure, triumphant disdain. It was the look of someone who believes they have utterly crushed their opponent. I simply met her gaze, gave a slight, neutral nod, and took a seat in the back row. The meeting began with Brenda's self-congratulatory opening remarks. She droned on about community values, protecting our investments, and the tough but necessary decisions she had made. She presented the new, more expensive landscaping contract and the proposed 15% dues increase with the air of a CEO announcing record profits. When it came time for the vote, she pushed it through quickly. A few nays were shouted from the audience, but many homeowners, intimidated or confused, voted in favor or abstained. Brenda's smile widened. She had her money. She had her power. She thought she had one. Finally, after an hour of procedural nonsense, she announced, "And that concludes the main agenda. We now have a few minutes for the homeowner open forum before we adjourn." This was it. I stood up, my briefcase in hand, and walked calmly to the single microphone set up in the aisle. "Brenda," I began, my voice amplified slightly by the small speaker system, echoing in the suddenly quiet room. "And members of the board. My name is Alex Miller. I live at 122 Oakwood Drive. I'd like to discuss a few issues regarding property rights, fiscal responsibility, and the potential for significant legal liability facing our association." Brenda's smile faltered. "Alex, if this is about your pool again, this is not the proper venue." I cut her off, my voice remaining level and calm. "It starts with my pool, but it doesn't end there. As many of you know, the president and her daughter have repeatedly trespassed on my property. This culminated in them misusing the 911 emergency system, an incident for which I have the official police report right here." I held up the report. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Furthermore, in direct retaliation for me securing my property against their trespassing, President Brenda issued me this. I held up the HOA violation notice. A $200 fine for installing the very security cameras that were necessary to document their illegal behavior. The murmurs grew louder. People were now sitting upright, looking back and forth between me and a visibly flustered Brenda. But this pattern of behavior, this belief that a board member is above the law, is merely a symptom of a much larger, more dangerous problem. I paused, letting the weight of my words hang in the air. I walked to the front and placed one of my bound reports in front of each board member. "What you have in front of you," I announced to the entire room, "is a copy of the official, legally filed subdivision plat map for Oakwood Creek Estates, obtained from the County Hall of Records. Now, if you would please direct your attention to the projector screen." I had given a copy to George, who was now at the projector. The image of the official plat map flashed onto the screen behind Brenda. I used a laser pointer from my pocket. As a land surveyor, I deal with documents like this every day. "Please note Lot 112, my property. Zoned R1, single-family residential. Now, please note Lot 72. The lot this very building is sitting on." I circled Lot 72 with the red dot. "It is also zoned R1, single-family residential. There is no variance, no special use permit, no commercial designation. According to the foundational legal document of our community, this clubhouse was never supposed to exist. For 15 years, The HOA has been operating a place of public assembly on a lot zoned for a single house, which means every meeting, including this one, has been held in an illegally operating building. Our multi-million-dollar liability insurance policy is almost certainly void, and every dollar of our dues spent maintaining this building has been spent on a non-compliant asset. Brenda didn't just break the rules about my pool. She's been presiding over an association that is, itself, fundamentally illegitimate. The room erupted. The silence was shattered, replaced by a wave of shock, confusion, and growing anger. It was the sound of a kingdom discovering its castle was made of sand. The reaction in the room was instantaneous and overwhelming. A cacophony of voices rose at once, questions, accusations, and demands for explanation. Homeowners were on their feet, pointing at the screen, at the board, at Brenda. The board, complacent expressions on the other board members' faces had been replaced with masks of pure panic as they frantically flipped through the reports I had given them, their eyes wide with the dawning horror of the situation. But all eyes eventually settled on Brenda. Her face had cycled through a rapid progression of emotions, from smug dismissal to confusion, then to pale shock, and finally, to a deep, blotchy red of pure, unadulterated rage. "This is absurd. It's a lie," she shrieked, slamming her hand on the table. "He's making this up. He's just angry about the pool. This is a personal attack." I remained at the microphone, my posture unchanged, my voice still calm. "It's not a lie, Brenda. It's a public record. The documents in front of your fellow board members are certified copies. The plat map on that screen bears the official stamp of the county clerk. These are not opinions. They are legally binding facts." George Garcia, the man who had been battling Brenda over his shutter paint, stood up. "Is this true?" he demanded of the rest of the board. "Have you people been using our money to run an illegal building?" The treasurer, a timid accountant named Howard, looked down at the report in his hands and stammered, I've never seen this official map before. The one we have in our files looks different." "That," I interjected smoothly, "is because the one in your files is a promotional map, not the legal plat. It has no legal standing. You can verify every single document in my report by taking a 10-minute trip to the County Hall of Records." Brenda, seeing her authority vaporizing before her eyes, tried to regain control. "This is a procedural trick. He's out of order. We are adjourning this meeting now." But no one was listening to her anymore. The homeowners were shouting questions about the insurance, the potential fines from the city, their own liability. Then, I delivered the final, elegant blow. "And there's one more thing," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. I gestured for George to switch the image on the projector. A new map appeared, a detailed survey I had personally conducted of the neighborhood entrance. As part of my research, I also surveyed the location of the expensive new Welcome to Oakwood Creek sign that President Brenda recently had installed using our funds. I used the laser pointer to trace a bright red line on the map. That is the legal property line between the HOA's common area and my property, Lot 112. And this, I circled the crisp outline of the new sign, is the sign's location. As you can see, the sign, in the newly poured concrete footing it sits on, encroaches 3.5 feet onto my private property. Not only did our president operate out of an illegal building, she used our increased dues to illegally install community property on a private citizen's land. A collective gasp went through the room. It was one thing to talk about abstract zoning violations. It was another to see a picture of a giant sign built where it didn't belong. It was a tangible, visible symbol of her incompetence and overreach. It was the final nail in the coffin of her credibility. A woman in the front row stood up. "I make a motion," she said, her voice shaking with anger, "for an immediate vote of no confidence in President Brenda and the entire current board for gross mismanagement and exposing this community to catastrophic legal and financial risk." "Second," shouted a dozen voices at once. Brenda just sat there, speechless, her face ashen. The power, the arrogance, the self-certainty, it had all drained away, leaving behind a humiliated, defeated woman sitting in the ruins of her petty kingdom. The very foundation of her power, the clubhouse, had become the instrument of her public downfall. Her reign was over. The aftermath of the meeting was swift and decisive. The vote of no confidence passed with an overwhelming majority. Brenda sat in stunned silence as homeowner after homeowner stood up to voice their anger and frustration, not just about the clubhouse, but about the months of petty notices, condescending newsletters, and her tyrannical leadership. She and the other 4 board members were removed from their positions effective immediately. An interim board, consisting of George Garcia and 2 other well-respected residents, was elected on the spot to manage the crisis. Brenda didn't wait for the meeting to officially adjourn. In the midst of the chaos, she gathered her purse and slinked out the side door of the clubhouse, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Her daughter Kylie, who had been waiting outside, saw her mother's face and the triumphant looks of the homeowners, and her usual smirk was gone, replaced by a look of bewildered shock. They scurried home, and for the first time in months, a true silence fell over their corner of the neighborhood. The consequences for Brenda were severe and lasting. She became a pariah. Neighbors who had once tolerated her now crossed the street to avoid her. Her attempts to justify her actions fell on deaf ears. The public humiliation was too great. Within 2 months, a for sale sign appeared on her lawn. The family moved to a different town, seeking an anonymity they could no longer find in Oakwood Creek. The new board took their responsibilities seriously. Their first act was to hire a land use attorney to assess the damage. The attorney confirmed every one of my findings. They had to formally notify the city of the zoning violation, which resulted in a significant fine and a cease and desist order on the use of the clubhouse until it could be brought into compliance. The process was expensive and arduous, involving rezoning applications, architectural reviews, and bringing parts of the building up to commercial code. The 15% dues increase Brenda had forced through, and more, was eaten up by legal and engineering fees. The budget was a constant, public reminder of her failure. My own issues were resolved quietly and efficiently. The interim board sent me a formal letter of apology on behalf of the HOA. The $200 fine for my cameras was rescinded and expunged from my record. A work crew, paid for by the HOA, arrived one morning to carefully dig up, move, and reinstall the massive "Welcome to Oakwood Creek" sign 3.5 feet back onto the common area where it belonged. I watched them from my window, sipping my coffee, feeling a profound sense of peace. My property line was restored. My privacy was secure. I got my quiet life back. But something within me had changed. I had been pushed from my comfortable solitude and forced to act. In doing so, I realized that my specialized knowledge had a purpose beyond my day job. I had not only protected my own rights, but had also saved my community from financial disaster and liberated them from a petty tyrant. I learned that seeking peace doesn't mean being passive. Sometimes, true peace can only be achieved by standing up, speaking truth to power, and meticulously, methodically, and publicly dismantling the false authority of those who abuse it. The moral of this story isn't just about a victory over an HOA Karen. It's about the immense power of knowing your rights and doing the research. It's a reminder that arrogance and ignorance are always vulnerable to the truth, especially when that truth is backed by certified documents. Never let anyone, no matter their title, make you feel small or powerless. Do your homework, gather your facts, and choose your moment. You might find that you have the power not just to win your own battle, but to bring about a much larger, more meaningful justice for everyone. So, what's a time you had to use your unique knowledge or skills to solve a problem someone else thought was impossible? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below.